Greetings of peace. It is a great honor to commence this afternoon's session with an invocation for peace with the renowned cellist Michael Fitzpatrick. lower left.
As those heavenly vibrations from the cello sit with us, I have the deep pleasure of sharing the words of someone I care about deeply and who's written a beautiful prayer, a prayer that will touch each of us because it's a prayer for those whose hearts carry the weight of nuclear weapons. The beginning and the end are in your hands, O Creator of the universe, and in our hands, you have placed the fate of this planet. We who are tested by having both creative and destructive power in our free will turn to you in sober fear and intoxicating hope. We ask for your guidance to share in your imagination, in our deliberations about the use of nuclear force. Help us to lift the fog of atomic darkness that hovers so pervasively over our Earth, your Earth, so that soon all eyes may see life magnified by your pure light. Bless all of us who wait today for your presence and who dedicate ourselves to achieve your intended peace and rightful equilibrium on earth. In the name of all that is holy and all that is hoped. Amen. This prayer was written by the Right Reverend William Swing, founder and president of the United Religions Initiative.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, distinguished panelists, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for your presence. The Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See is pleased to welcome you to this conference on nuclear weapons and the moral compass. Since the emergence of the nuclear age, the Holy See has not ceased to raise the moral argument against the possession and the use of nuclear weapons. Because of the incalculable and indiscriminate humanitarian consequences of such weapons, their use is clearly against international humanitarian law. Thus, the Holy See has worked and continues to work for a world without nuclear weapons. Pope John XXIII, in his 1963 encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, called for the abolition of nuclear weapons and for the establishment of an adequate disarmament program to achieve that end. Then Pope Paul VI's plea of jamais plus la guerre, of war never again, still reverberates in the General Assembly Hall. But his appeal to let weapons fall from our hands, especially the terrible weapons that modern science has given us, in clear reference to nuclear arms, has still gone unheeded. In 1982, Pope John Paul II addressed a message to the United Nations General Assembly on its second conference devoted to disarmament. The Pope said that in the current conditions of the Cold War, deterrence, considered not as an end in itself, but as a step toward a progressive disarmament, may still be judged morally acceptable. Nonetheless, he continued, in order to ensure peace, it is indispensable not to be satisfied with this minimum, which is always susceptible to the real danger of explosion. The Holy Father, therefore, never countenanced deterrence as a permanent measure. And as time progressed and the central promise of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons remained unfulfilled, the Holy See stepped up its efforts to argue for the abolition of nuclear weapons. In his 206th World Day of Peace message, Pope Benedict XVI criticized the argument of nuclear arms for security as completely fallacious and affirmed that peace requires that all strive for progressive and concerted nuclear disarmament. In his message to His Excellency Mr. Sebastian Kurz, President of the Vienna Conference on the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons in December 2014, Pope Francis wrote, "I am convinced that the desire for peace and fraternity planted deep in the human heart will bear fruit in concrete ways to ensure that nuclear weapons are banned once and for all to the benefit of our common home. The popes lend their voices to echo the voice speaking in human consciences, directing us toward peace, to echo the concerns and aspirations, the hopes and the fears of billions of men, women, and children who throughout the world are constantly face the threat of nuclear weapons. Our conference this afternoon intends to advance the efforts towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. It intends to face the problem from the moral perspective. Thus, to speak to us in the theme of nuclear weapons and the moral compass, we have invited eminent religious personalities from various religious faiths and Christian churches. They will argue why a moral perspective against the use of nuclear weapons has a role to play in nuclear disarmament efforts. Dear friends, during the Vienna Conference on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons in December 2014, that is last year, the Holy See presented a paper as a contribution to the conference. And the paper, which you have a copy, I think, right in front of you, is entitled Nuclear Disarmament: Time for Abolition. The paper argues that disarmament treaties are not just legal obligations. They are also moral commitments based on trust between states, rooted in the trust that citizens place in their governments. It therefore is neither a scientific nor a political paper. Rather, the paper advances the moral argument for nuclear disarmament. The paper starts from the premise that if commitments to nuclear disarmament are not made in good faith and result in breaches of trust, the proliferation of such weapons will be the logical corollary. For our own good and that of future generations, we have no reasonable and moral option other than the abolition of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are a global problem, and they impact on all countries and all peoples, including future generations. Moreover, the ever-growing interdependence and globalization demand that whatever response we may have against the threat of nuclear weapons can only be collective and based on reciprocal trust. Despite some progress, nuclear disarmament is currently in crisis. The institutions that are supposed to move this process forward have been blocked for years. The central promise of the NPT has remained a distant dream. In fact, while the pre-NPT nuclear power countries not only have not disarmed, but are also modernizing the nuclear arsenals, some pre-NPT non-nuclear countries have acquired or are in the process of acquiring nuclear arms capabilities. What is even more terrifying is the possibility that non-state actors like terrorist and extremist organizations will acquire nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons cannot create for us a stable and secure world. Peace and international stability cannot be founded on mutually assured destruction or on the threat of total destruction. The Holy See believes that peace cannot be reduced solely to maintaining a balance of power between enemies. On the contrary, as Pope Francis affirms, peace must be built on justice, socio-economic development, freedom, respect for human rights, the participation of all in public affairs, and the building of trust between peoples. The Holy See calls for a new thinking in how to challenge complacency surrounding the belief in the theory of deterrence, and that is nuclear deterrence, by focusing also attention on a number of aspects, namely the cost of the nuclear stalemate to the global common good, the illusions of security inherent in the possession of nuclear arms, the inequality at the root of the non-proliferation regime according to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the enormous toll that the current nuclear policies take on the poor and on the world's priorities. As we know, the United Nations will soon adopt the post-2015 development agenda. The Sustainable Development Goals contained therein are daunting and require enormous means of implementation. It would be naive and myopic, I believe, if we seek to assure world peace and security through nuclear weapons rather than through the eradication of poverty, making healthcare and education and other basic services accessible to all, and promoting peaceful institutions and societies through dialogue and solidarity. Would you not agree that the enormous resources allocated to the production, maintenance, security, and modernization of nuclear weapons could be better invested in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which could better guarantee peace and security for all? Arguing for nuclear abolition from the moral perspective for the Holy See necessarily mean, and primarily mean, to appeal to human consciences. As Paul VI affirmed here in 1965 in his address to the General Assembly, today as never before, in an era marked by such human progress, there is need for an appeal to the moral conscience of man. For the danger comes not from progress, nor from science. The real danger comes from man himself, who has at his disposal ever more powerful instruments, which can be used as well as for destruction as for the loftiest conquests. Indeed, in spite of the tremendous progress that humanity has achieved so far, the human person remains the master of our destiny and our future here on earth. And that is why we appeal to the conscience of everyone. We appeal to be conscious, to work for the ban of nuclear weapons. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, no one could ever say that a world without nuclear weapons is easily achievable. It is not. It is extremely arduous. It is even a utopia for some. But there is no alternative than to work towards its achievement. As President John F. Kennedy once said, the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war. And frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears. I hope not this afternoon. But we have no more urgent task. Dear friends, I thank you again for your presence and your participation in this debate. Good afternoon.
Your Excellencies, diplomats, friends, brothers and sisters, in these hallowed halls, appeals are almost uniformly made to self-interest. Today, we are going to hear and begin invoking an appeal to the human conscience, because the appeals thus far, since the very first resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations calling for the elimination of weapons of mass destruction, has not eliminated these horrific devices. We commence now, today, with us, an appeal to conscience. So let that appeal begin with both substance, passion, and compassion. I have the great honor of introducing a distinguished panel of speakers. Their biographies have been distributed, so I will give very short introductions, and you can read about their biographies in the program. It is my honor to introduce first Ms. Virginia Gamba, who is the Director and Deputy to the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs of the United Nations. Ms. Gamba.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be with you today, representing the Office for Disarmament Affairs at this event. The Secretary General and the other Secretary General for Disarmament send their greetings to you too. The Global Security Institute rightfully deserves plaudits for their ongoing efforts to bring the voice of morality to the global discussion on the future of nuclear weapons. I want to thank the Institute and our host, the Permanent Mission of the Holy See, for inviting me to speak today. Morality and the abolition of nuclear weapons is a topic that is an increasingly contentious international environment, is of critical importance. The debate about morality in warfare is almost as old as war itself. However, when it comes to nuclear weapons, and because of their vast destructive power and devastating human, predominantly civilian, consequences, they are in a category all of their own. In recognition of this fact, 3 years ago, in a statement to the people of Nagasaki, a city that, as we all know, was a victim of the devastating consequences of nuclear weapons, the Secretary General stated clearly that, I quote, "The humanitarian impact of the use of nuclear weapons cannot be reconciled with the laws of war and basic morality." This basic, dare I say, essential morality referred to by the Secretary General is a morality that states it is wrong to use weapons indiscriminately, that it is wrong to use weapons without proportion or precaution, and above all, that it is wrong to precipitate the mass killing of civilians, either directly or indirectly. In other words, it is the basic morality that is reflected in the precepts of international humanitarian law, and to my mind at least, it is exceedingly difficult to see how, by any leap of logic, nuclear weapons can be anything other than contrary to international humanitarian law. This is not a new concept. It was recognized by the General Assembly in 1961 through Resolution 1653, and again, of course, in the landmark International Court of Justice opinion of 1996, which found that the threat of use of nuclear weapons would generally be contrary to the rules of international law applicable in armed conflict, and in particular, the principles and rules of humanitarian law. But if I may say, personally, I think we should focus more on what this last bit means. Horrific as the consequences of the use of the A-bomb were for the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there were survivors. We have no idea of the consequences should contemporary nuclear weapons be used, but surely they are seen as offering assured perishability. Today, the message of nuclear weapons is very clear. People are expendable. This is why Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has often referred to disarmament and non-proliferation as global public goods, precisely because their benefits are indivisible and enjoyed by all member states, indeed, by all people. Later this month, the 2015 Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, will commence. The importance of this treaty cannot be understated. It remains the cornerstone of the non-proliferation regime and the essential foundation for the pursuit of nuclear disarmament. However, amidst the NPT's action plans, the step-by-step approaches, and the non-proliferation obligations, the voice of moral persuasion is slowly but surely being felt. This is evident in that the consensus outcome document from the last review conference 5 years ago expressed its deep concern at the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result from the use of nuclear weapons. This agreed position has precipitated a gathering momentum for the humanitarian approach to nuclear disarmament, one that all but ensures this issue will have a significant role at this year's review conference. This movement, born out of the lack of progress by the nuclear weapon states to address seriously the commitments they have undertaken as they continue to preserve, improve, and rationalize their nuclear arsenals has resuscitated the link between nuclear weapons and international humanitarian law and reinvigorated the frozen debate about the abolition of nuclear weapons. The humanitarian movement has forged a new common understanding of the catastrophic consequences that would result from even a limited use of nuclear weapons, and also of the international community's inability to respond in any way to mitigate the human suffering that such a use would cause. In addition, the movement has created new constituencies for nuclear disarmament, uniting medical practitioners, climate scientists, and relief workers with the peace and security community. The third and most recent conference on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, held in Vienna last December, was attended by 158 countries and resulted in a pledge by Austria to fill the legal gap for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. These conferences, the first held in 2013 in Oslo, Norway, and the second in Nayarit, Mexico in 2014, help in clarifying beyond any doubt the real consequences for humanity and the natural environment resulting from the use of nuclear weapons. Additionally, it is worth noting that 155 United Nations member states supported the statement on humanitarian consequences delivered by New Zealand at the UN General Assembly's First Committee in November of last year. Those who dismiss the humanitarian movement as a utopian distraction would do well to heed these numbers, because they represent over 80% of the NPT state parties. This overwhelming majority of state parties now believe that humanitarian considerations should be at the center of all future disarmament deliberation. I would like to conclude by commending the critical role civil society has played in developing and spreading the humanitarian message. I encourage those organizations that have taken up the humanitarian standard, including GSI, to redouble this support and activism in advancing global nuclear disarmament and strengthening the NPT. The rationales for the pursuit of nuclear disarmament are many and obvious. Nuclear weapons are expensive, they have no military utility, and they diminish, not enhance, stability, as many would have us believe. Yet above and beyond all of these reasons, the moral imperative remains the most urgent rationale for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Let us leave to future generations a safer and more peaceful world than the imperfect one we share today. I thank you.
It is a humbling honor as a civil society organization to co-host this along with the Holy See, which I believe now, with Pope Francis's leadership, will be increasingly taking a leading role in setting the moral compass on this issue. But it would be remiss of me not to recognize the leading role that Ambassador Lebron Cabachalan of the Philippines has played in this very, very critical issue. Ambassador Cabachalan, the former permanent representative of the Philippines to the United Nations, served as the president of the very successful 2010 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, an extraordinary achievement of bringing all states parties to consensus on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty disarmament commitments that exist as solemn commitments to eliminate nuclear weapons, and I quote the parties, an unequivocal undertaking to obtain the elimination of nuclear weapons. He has been on the forefront of this initiative to set the moral compass on nuclear weapons. So he has just flown in all the way from Manila to be here for this gathering, because it is not, I can see, it is not just a professional responsibility for him, but it is a profoundly human responsibility that he passes on to us. Ambassador Cabachalan.
Your Grace, Monsignor Auza, Chair of Global Security Institute, Jonathan. Let me first thank you and congratulate you for hosting this event and carrying it forward, and I hope forcefully forward what we had begun in the two previous sessions or events, which were co-sponsored by the Philippines. The one which was here, and the previous one, the second one, was in Vienna, at the time when we had the third the conference on humanitarian consequences of nuclear bombs. As this event is coming in the eve of the 2015 RevCon, or NPT Review Conference, I think it would be good if I will situate you on the current thinking on what should be the outcome of 2015. Given that what has been advertised or said by Gronatan that I achieved commitments very specific, forgetting about anything about Pacta Sunt Servanda, nothing has been achieved. Nothing much, nothing practically. I was in Annecy about 3 weeks ago in a gathering of key negotiators. The discussions gravitated towards re-emphasizing, restating the 13 practical steps adopted in 2000, RevCon. Restating, reconfirming the 2010 Consensus Action Plan. And thirdly, to put impetus to what was agreed in 2010 relating to the Conference on the Middle East that is implementing the 1995 resolution for convening a conference that is directed toward the establishment of a Middle East free of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. Putting it in totality, the direction is to have or to reconfirm the so-called 2010 plus, because 2010 action plan included the 13 practical steps of 2000 and the reference to the Middle East. So the general thinking, just general sketch or architecture, is that it will be a 2010 plus. Now what is this plus? This plus could mean relating to the Austrian pledge, relating to the Nuclear Weapons Convention. It all depends on what could be agreed upon. It could mean definitive approaches towards nuclear zero. It could also include the idea of having an evaluation mechanism for nuclear disarmament, because right now we don't have. But these are all preliminary ideas. Now, indeed, we have an splendid, we have very known, a very impressive list of speakers. These are spiritual leaders, heavyweights. And indeed, I feel a midget in this gathering. What perhaps I achieved that was calling more on temporal power. And maybe I failed, because in the order of things, is the tally sheet. What has been done? And that's why I am gratified that we might have to need the spiritual leaders that will bring us all up. But I would like to think that maybe we have choices in the courses that we are going to pursue as we move on. One, we continue the course that we are doing and just tinkering here and there, using the same logic, rehashing the political arguments, using the usual diplomatic maneuvering, with the hope that we will inch forward towards what we would like to achieve, and that is the total elimination of nuclear bombs. At the same time, hoping against hope that this massively destructive, the most inhuman weapon of mass destruction will never or will not be released at all. That will annihilate us all. And who is to blame? Who is to carry the moral weight? Why it happened? The elimination of mankind? Is it the spiritual leaders? Maybe. Maybe they have not done so much in carrying the message to an ordinary person, in carrying the messages to the diplomats, to the government. Or maybe all of us, because you have not listened to what they have been saying. I will not say a lot more, but I just want to say two more things. One is that a word of caution. In this hall, in the interaction of countries, morality, a call to ethical consideration is not saleable. It's not something that would fly very quickly. Yet, it is ironic because it's the basis for all the agreements. Don't you think it is not a violation of your basic human right? If you in the province, in a lowland barrio or some state, without knowing, and you'll be blown out of the space, you'll be blown out of existence, it's not a basic human right violation of that person. And that relates to morality. But what? We always caution with nice words. We cannot use words like, it's immoral to have nuclear bombs. It is a sin, an instrument of sin to have nuclear bomb. It is an instrument for mass murder. Can you do that? But it is very important that this should be all in our minds, because as we continue our engagement in this hall, they become the real force for achieving or pushing what you would like to have. But I also would like to add very quickly that at the very end, as I have said in the first session, first event, that I would love it and I would want it, in fact, that one day, in every pulpit, in every corner, if those that I have said will resonate and will be said, and if one or two or politician will not be elected that will run counter to what should be achieved, things might change. Thank you, Jonathan.
I'd like to thank Ambassador Cabachalan and Ms. Gamba and bring on the next group of speakers. While they're coming up, I would be remiss in not recognizing someone who's somewhat of a hero to me, the former Republican congressman from Connecticut, Chris Shays, who when he was in Congress, convened some of the only hearings that our Congress has ever had where the case was able to be made of why we must get rid of nuclear weapons, the legal case, the diplomatic case, the moral case. And his hearing was scheduled, for 4 hours, and it went on for over 8. It went on late in the evening. And thank you, Congressman. And he highlighted that this, I recall on the record that it was one of the most important hearings that you said that you'd heard in decades there. I hope you come back to the Congress for all of us. Oh, you're here. Okay. I think you're still here. Archbishop, please. Reverend William Swing is the former Episcopal Bishop of California, and importantly, the visionary and president of one of the world's largest, most dynamic interfaith organizations. And in that interfaith organization, he helped form a group of voices of conscience to address nuclear weapons issues. And in that little group is Ambassador Thomas Graham, who led the United States negotiations for the extension of the NPT and this Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, Ambassador James Goodby, and other distinguished people, including former Secretary of State George Shultz. That's a formidable group that he's gathered. Plus, a conversation with millions of people all over the planet. He's flown in from California to be here with us today. Reverend Swing.
Good afternoon. I come bearing two messages. The first message is from the former Secretary of State, George Shultz. In the past, he has hosted Roman Catholic bishops and evangelical leaders separately at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University. The theme on both occasions has been nuclear abolition. When he heard that Roman Catholics and evangelicals and many others were gathering here today, he wanted everyone to know of his wholehearted support and how thrilled he is. The second message is from a Japanese lady from Hiroshima, Tomoko Watanabe, whom I met in San Francisco last month, when she brought seedlings of 3 trees that had survived the Hiroshima atomic blast on August the 6th, 1945. In a few months from now, when these little saplings are strong enough, they will be planted in the Japanese tea garden in San Francisco as a symbol of the nuclear peace that exists between Japan and the United States. After giving me the tiny seedlings, Tomoko Watanabe told me the story of her dear friend, Kyoko Imori. When the atomic bomb hit in Hiroshima in 1945, Kyoko was an 11-year-old girl in the 6th grade at Honkawa Elementary School, about 400 yards from the epicenter of destruction. Every child, every teacher, every staff member in Honkawa Elementary School died instantly. Everyone except Kyoko Imori. Also, her entire family was gone in a second, vaporized or pulverized beyond recognition. In her teens, and as a young lady, what followed for Kyoko was a tumor in her pancreas, followed by thyroid cancer, followed by colon cancer, and then meningioma, and then all the way along the line, unremitting pain. Pain. Despite the unfolding of diseases, she married and was pregnant. Imagine. The possibility of Kyoko giving birth and starting a family. But that was not to be. Miscarriage followed miscarriage. Today, 70 years after the bomb, 70 years after the bomb landed 400 yards from where she was in school, Kyoko lies in a hospital bed in Japan, needing a dose of morphine 4 times every 4 hours, around the clock, every day, to endure the pain she inflicted in Honkawa Elementary School on June the 6th, 1945. In the hallways of her hospital today, her voice can be heard crying out, "Please kill me." Who today makes the decisions about building more and sophisticated nuclear weapons to target tomorrow's children? Of course, the experts do. The expert politicians and military strategists of the nuclear nations. But what do they know about nuclear degraded life? What experience have they had in witnessing the effects of the weapons that they upgrade and modernize? Do they decide the way forward from an antiseptic safe distance from the reality of nuclear pain, or do they listen to the nuclear lament, such as the lament of Kyoko as she mourns her unborn and her vaporized classmates and her annihilated family while she endures a lifetime of excruciating agony? I would wager that she learned more about nuclear weapons in the 6th grade on Hankawa Elementary School than what has been learned by all today's experts of all the nations. She knows the most important thing to know about nuclear weapons. She carries the knowledge in her tiny body. What is NPT? Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's the question. Is the NPT about what we aspire to once we have run out of enemies? Or is it about where we stand now when we have weighed the human consequences of our diabolic nuclear creation? It all comes down to the ability to hear. Can we hear a voice in the corridors of a Japanese hospital today pleading, "Please kill me"? For God's sake, what are we going to do about that? Thank you.
Dr. William Vendley is the Secretary General of Religions for Peace, which is one of the most, it is the most high-level, dynamic, interfaith dialogue organization in the world. There isn't any organization that does as much to bring the world's religious leaders together to cooperate as his organization. Dr. Vendley.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Archbishop Auza and you, Jonathan, distinguished panelists, excellencies, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to share with you this afternoon the ever-growing multi-religious consensus on the need for a step-by-step total nuclear disarmament. This is growing across the world in the religious communities. This growing multi-religious consensus is built upon a very deep respect for the fact that religions are different. Therefore, it's not a theological consensus, rather it's a moral consensus. And at bottom, it expresses the growing global solidarity rooted in care for human dignity and care for our common good. Each religious heritage makes its own distinctive religious arguments on the imperative, first of all, to build peace and against the use and possession of nuclear weapons. At the same time, many forms of moral argumentation revolve around the reality of self-contradiction. Basically, we use our intelligence, our wills, and industry to advance human knowledge and human flourishing, and what we like to call our common good. Are we then to use our intelligence, wills, and industry against themselves? Is this not a massive self-contradiction in which we subvert ourselves by undercutting the very conditions of possibility of our own existence? Do we, others have echoed this, do we have the right to impose collective suicide? Do we have the right to impose even the slow, cancerous suicide of the contradiction of deterrence that eats away at the conditions of possibility for our humanity? Are we to numb our moral sensibilities, subvert our intelligence, and hijack our industry so that we can accept the grossly abnormal as normal? Are we to trick ourselves to try to do that? Not only explicit religious teachings, but I would also argue intellectual and moral coherence demands that we reject this path of self-contradiction. And Bishop Swing, I would add, in light of your very moving reflection, that this is true at the level of our deepest feelings, and that we contradict our deepest emotional in touchness with reality, and it's true at the level of aesthetics, of beauty. We blunt our openness to the beauty of existence when we contradict ourselves so profoundly. Finally, I would like to underline a point made in the Vatican December 2014 message to His Excellency, Mr. Sebastian Kurz, Minister of the Republic of Austria and President of the Conference on Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons. In that message, we can read, and I quote, "A global ethic is needed. A global ethic is needed if we are to reduce the nuclear threat and work towards nuclear disarmament," end of quote. That point is further amplified in the Holy See's submission, Nuclear Disarmament, Time for Abolition, presented originally in Vienna in December 2014. There we read, and I quote again, "What is needed is a constructive ethics rooted in a deeper vision of peace, an ethics in which means and ends coincide more closely, where the positive components of peace inform and limit the use of force." It's a profound point that is being argued, and one I think deeply resonant in all the religious traditions. The Vatican is arguing, as I read it, that an emphasis on the positive dimensions of peace provide an essential framework for the imperative for nuclear disarmament. And I would further argue from very detailed experience that this is widely shared among the world's diverse religious traditions. In 2013, 700 religious leaders gathered in Vienna, Austria, for the Ninth World Assembly of Religions for Peace, the organization I represent. Together, they advanced a notion of shared well-being that included the notion of shared security. Yes, we need state security because the integrity of borders must be respected, but that is not enough. Yes, we need human security because the well-being of people within borders must be honored, but that too is not enough. Today, we need to advance and implement shared security rooted in our shared well-being. Stated in practical, if somewhat negative terms, we are no more secure than the most vulnerable among us. And certainly with regard to nuclear weapons, that is true, because we are all under the threat of nuclear weapons. Stated in positive and morally normative terms, we are obliged, indeed we truly live when we are in relationship with, cooperating with, and in caring solidarity with the other. These positive dimensions of peace can provide to all of us the ground for a global solidarity in shared ethics that can build the trust essential for total disarmament. Is this possible? Religions, each in their own way, would give us the strength to say yes. Thank you very much.
As a moderator, I will take what's the choice? And imagine if the Biological Weapons Convention said, no country can use polio or smallpox as a weapon, but we will entrust international security to 9 countries which will be able to use the plague as a weapon. That would offend our global ethic that already exists today, which is founded on the Golden Rule. and nuclear weapons held by 9 states saying these are essential for our security, and then trying to stop them from spreading, basically violates that existing global ethic recognized by all societies, all cultures, and all religions. Do unto others as you would have things done to you in various iterations. And that violation of morality breeds instability in international relations, because part of the architecture of being a human being is moral. Every baby comes into the world and is embraced by love, or it doesn't grow. That love is the basis of our morality. And the nations of the world have forgotten that morality when it comes to nuclear weapons. And it's incumbent upon us to force them to adhere to the most basic morality. A young man who was an inspiration to me because of his insights into these issues is our next speaker, Tyler Wigg Stevenson, who is the chairman of the Global Task Force on Nuclear Weapons for the World Evangelical Alliance, a relatively small organization with about 650 million members.
Thank you, Jonathan. Rest assured, I speak for all of them directly. They've sent me letters. Thank you, Archbishop Auza, for inviting the World Evangelical Alliance to be part of this important event. On behalf of the WA, I'd like to express my gratitude for the long-standing leadership of the Roman Catholic Church on nuclear disarmament and reaffirm our desire for evangelical Catholic collaboration, and indeed collaboration with all Christians and all people of goodwill. Toward that end, it was my great pleasure to join your predecessor at the UN, Archbishop Chulakot, at a similar panel to this one at the NPT PrepCom last year. We could make it a spring thing. I also was honored to be part of the WA delegation last November that met personally with Pope Francis about issues of mutual concern, with the elimination of nuclear weapons emerging as one of the most important and pressing items. I'm very grateful for Pope Francis continuing the Vatican's strong teaching on the moral dimensions of nuclear weapons and deterrence in our post-Cold War era, especially in his message to the Vienna Conference and the paper which the Holy See contributed to that meeting. Now, our topic today is the moral compass, and it has already been said that there are those who insist that moral values are irrelevant to nuclear weapons. Thankfully, not here on this panel. But I have to say I'm unconvinced by such protests, and here's why. I imagine that tomorrow a handful of nations walk into the United Nations General Assembly and announce that their extraordinary national interests have driven them to develop a new weapon. They call it the abortion bomb. Fear not, they assure you. The abortion bomb is reserved for times of extreme national emergency only. Yet you should also fear greatly, they warn sternly. For the detonation of the abortion bomb against an enemy population would be terrible indeed, causing the immediate death of every child in the womb within its sizable blast radius and the sterilization of every adult. That would be the extent of its effects. Otherwise, it wouldn't kill or inflict any physical destruction. But by threatening to take an entire generation from the adversary, the abortion bomb creators claim it would force the terms of peace. Now, they hope never to use it. They believe that only the threat of using it can prevent its use. It's therefore a stabilizing, one might even call it a peacekeeping weapon. But it is so terrible that only they should have it, and they will vigorously work to prevent others from acquiring it. They believe its threat to be so awful it will rest in its silos till the end of time. But don't worry, the situation isn't permanent, for the abortion bomb powers promise that someday, when every other problem plaguing humankind has been solved, they will pursue good faith negotiations to eliminate it. Now imagine hearing this announcement. Imagine the final sentence of the speech, the pregnant pause after the last syllable. And then imagine the righteous explosion of voices in response. No man or woman of good will or good conscience could stay silent that day. No nation would fail to declaim this as an abomination, not even properly a weapon, a crime against humanity strapped to a ballistic missile. No nation would accept the proposal of an open-ended timeline for this weapons abolition at the discretion and desired pace of its possessors. All people would demand to fill the legal gap for its elimination and prohibition. All nations would subscribe to a ban, regardless of the wishes of the abortion bomb-armed states. And none of us would shirk language of right and wrong that day. The scriptures tell us that peacemakers are blessed. They also tell us to condemn those who say peace, peace when there is no peace, as the prophet Jeremiah did to the court sycophants in his day, who denied that his nation's injustice invited the judgment of God. And this secular nuclear age, like the biblical age before it, doesn't want for court prophets and theological lapdogs who are ready to tell rulers what they want to hear. That their ways are good and righteous, and either that there is no God in heaven or that God is there and smiles upon them. But we must not be those who say peace, peace when there is no peace about nuclear weapons. Make no mistake, we are in a fight. Of course, the war of God is not fought with guns and knives, as the blasphemers believe. Such weapons can do nothing against our true adversaries, which are the devil's schemes and the wickedness of every human heart. Against this enemy, our only weapon is the word of God. Not for nothing does St. Paul write to the church in Ephesus, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Well, in Conference Room 4, rulers, authorities, powers, and spiritual forces. Such words sound ancient, bizarre, and even embarrassing, spoken in a modern secular institution like this, but the singular virtue of evangelicals is that we're shameless, so there you go. Besides, when we push through the antiquity of the words, we see Paul's describing a timeless concept which is as readily recognizable today as it was 2 millennia ago, because we live in the age of mass slaughter. Whether you take your terminology from Paul or Freud, it's undeniable that in all of us there is that which can tolerate or perpetrate or even exult in the destruction of human life and the desecration of goodness. And at various times in our history, these desires have taken on a collective dark reality of their own and have worked evil, and the names even in living history are legion. The Shoah, the Gulag, the Rwandan genocide, to cite just a few. But it is the same powers and the same forces at work, and it is against these that God in heaven is at war. From the local skirmishes in each of our hearts to the vast battlefields of systemic injustice and evil that claim lives and dignity and welfare of millions. And I tell you that God is at war against nuclear weapons too. For in these bombs we see simply the weaponization, the technologizing of the same spiritual forces of evil manifested in the utterly inhumane and immoral tactic of indiscriminate killing. Now, professional apologists of nuclear weapons can be more acrobatic than the entire circus tent of clowns that they so resemble. And there are certainly imaginary scenarios carefully circumscribed by the ethicist's imagination in which nuclear weapons might be used in ways that could be reconciled to basic moral principles, but imaginary scenarios are imaginary. The investigation of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, now thoroughly and ably prosecuted in Oslo, Nyara, and Vienna, shows the simple existence of these weapons, their production, and their testing has been the cause of relentless injustice, usually against poor and indigenous communities. The humanitarian consequences investigation shows that the risk of nuclear weapons are radically underestimated by their official apologists. And this investigation shows that any realistic forecast of nuclear weapons use, no matter how limited, would cause radiological and other harms that far exceed the geographic and temporal bounds of a given conflict, in addition to the unknowable consequences of breaking the taboo. And this is not to mention the use of nuclear weapons at the full levels afforded by modern arsenals, God have mercy upon us, which would cause death and suffering so vast that we grasp at theological language to describe it, apocalypse and Armageddon. And all in the name of what? To what great purpose? What cosmic end justifies such destruction? To national interest. It is hard to know whether to weep or laugh at the absurd audacity of it. National interest. Has there ever been such a diabolically effective mantle for disguising the collective purposes of merely mortal men and women? The days of humans are like grass, Scripture says. We flourish like the flower of the field, and then the wind blows over us and we are gone. Our places remember us no more. Yet today's withering flowers arrogate to ourselves the flame that could burn the whole meadow to stubble. Perhaps we do so to delude ourselves that we will never die, that our purposes endure in some meaningful way. But the psalmist is right. Even princes, when their spirit departs, return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing. Could there ever really be a more ludicrously disproportionate pairing of means and ends than nuclear weapons with national interest? How pathetically tragic we must look in the sight of heaven, pretending to be gods while genuflecting in fear to the weapons we have made. We are at war with the worst impulses of the human heart in their individual and collective manifestations. But hear that the victory is won. There's a wonderful tale told about Archbishop Desmond Tutu during apartheid. He was preaching St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town, and the armed police came and surrounded and lined the walls, and he paused in the sermon and addressed them, and he said, "You are powerful, you are very powerful, but you are not gods, and I serve a God who will not be mocked. So since you've already lost, I invite you to come over and join the winning side." Those who wield nuclear weapons put God to the test. I pray every day, and I'm not speaking metaphorically, that he will not give us over to judgment, which is to say, simply to allow us the full consequences of our own action. I pray we will continue to enjoy the blessing of the God who mercifully foils the plans of the nation, as Scripture says. But while there is still time for the amendment of life, as the ancient daily prayer of my church puts it, I beg all men and women of goodwill to join in the fight, and it is a fight, not just for the welfare of those who reject nuclear weapons, but for the sake of those who even now possess them. So for the love of God, don't let this conference that starts later on this month go by with more platitudes about strategic stability and endless deferral of promises unkept. And if hands cannot be forced, then at least raise a moral witness so that it will not be said that the verdict was not given. May God strengthen all of us who fight for peace. Thank you.
These talks will be put on the internet from the Global Security Institute, and I hope other places. You're perfectly, please take everything from our website and spread it around. But these will be spread around, and I really believe that these sharings need a wider audience. I feel very strongly that the sharing from the Holy See sets up a landmark of a compass point for us. It is absolutely breathtaking in its insight, its clarity, and its coherence. It's desperately needed. I will personally commit to writing the most heartfelt thanks to Pope Francis. I would urge everyone here to similarly do so, and to any leader who will take it upon themselves to move this issue. But there is a leader who has done that, and it is on us to support such leadership, and on some of us to take the role of leadership. We have many people I can see in the audience here who are leaders of countries that have taken a leadership role. Diplomats with enormous influence on their heads of state. In the last General Assembly debates, not one head of state challenged the world to get rid of nuclear weapons. There are diplomats here from CELAC, from the heads of state of Latin America, which have taken a very strong collective position. We hope that they will bring the debate to the General Assembly. There will be deliberations in this room next month Some say that what happens in Conference Room 4 stays in Conference Room 4. Others say it gets to Las Vegas. What happens today, it is on us to get it out of Conference Room 4 out to the world. And when the commitments are made here by the states with nuclear weapons to get rid of them, they must be held to account. What happens in this room cannot stay in this room. And I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who I know is deeply committed to helping make that happen, as are all of our speakers, but I know his personal commitment, of Rabbi Peter Noble, who is the senior rabbi of Beth Emet, the Free Synagogue in Evanston, Illinois, and the immediate past president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Rabbi?
Thank you very much. I wish I could preach like that. The Holy See is to be congratulated for its important statement, Nuclear Disarmament, Time for Abolition. It is a clarion call for a global ethic which changes the nature of the relationships among nations and moves toward a new era in which the survival of the planet is not only guaranteed, but all its inhabitants will thrive. It calls for a paradigm shift, moving away from deterrence as a strategy to the abolition of nuclear weapons as a practical and moral necessity. Because of the importance of this document and the sacred nature of its content, in good Jewish tradition, I will offer a Jewish commentary on 10 of its most salient points. Number one, now more than ever, the facts of technological and political interdependence cry out for an ethic of solidarity in which we will work with one another for a less dangerous and morally responsible global future. The Talmud teaches that God created a single human being to declare that each and every one of us was God's creation, equally precious in God's eyes, and that the taking of a single human life was the equivalent of destroying the entire world. Now that we have the capacity to destroy the entire world, God calls upon us to step back from the brink and reassert the preciousness of every single life in order to preserve all life. Two, for 60 years, nuclear deterrence has been thought to provide only a sort of peace. As we already heard, the prophet Jeremiah warned, from the smallest to the greatest, they are all greedy for gain, priest and prophet alike. They all act falsely, saying, Shalom, Shalom, ve'ein Shalom, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Nuclear deterrence is a false peace. Genuine peace can only be achieved when omnicide, the ability to destroy creation, has been removed as a possibility, and we join with the psalmist in saying to one another, how good and how pleasant it is when brothers and sisters dwell together in harmony. 3, it must be admitted that every possession of nuclear weapons, even for the purpose of deterrence, is morally problematical. Mutually assured destruction, the old phrase for nuclear deterrence, is mad. It is an illusion of safety. The mushroom cloud threatens to obliterate the rainbow, which God placed in the heavens after the flood, as the symbol of God's promise to Noah and all of humankind, that God would never again be the source of universal destruction. That awesome power of destruction now resides in our hands. Incinerating the rainbow will unleash devastation beyond God's or our darkest nightmares. The late Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, when asked by a student, is gelatin kosher, responded, what about nuclear weapons? We today proclaim with Abraham Joshua Heschel that nuclear weapons are not kosher. 4, the language of intention obscures the fact that nuclear armories and instruments of military strategy inherently bear active disposition for use. Professor Ruvain Kimmelman writes, for the deterrent to be effective, it must be the immoral intent to use them. He continues, for Isaiah, it is not enough to desist from going to war. Nations must also cease the education for war. Training for war itself may make war irresistible. The Isaianic policy of swords into plowshares however, entails not just the replacement of the sword with the plowshare, but the beating of the sword into a plowshare, that is, the conversion of the means of destruction into the means of construction. Creating an economic alternative to the arms industry is thus an imperative of realistic disarmament. The essence of this biblical perspective is that we must change the paradigm. It is not enough to destroy weapons of mass destruction, but to change the way people think, so war is not an option, and then all can thrive and prosper. 5, the political and military officials of nuclear-possessing states assume the responsibility to use these weapons if deterrence fails. Rabbi Bradley Archson states, Judaism presents a flat refusal to countenance the use of nuclear weapons, even as a tool of defense. The scope of their devastation, the inability to provide for the immunity of non-combatants, the meaninglessness of dividing defense from offense in a nuclear war propels this weapon beyond the pale of acceptability. 6, the time has come for new thinking on how to challenge complacency surrounding the belief in nuclear deterrence. Changed circumstances bring new responsibilities for decision makers. There is a principle in Jewish law, shinui ha'itim. Changed circumstances call for a revision of previous decisions. It may have seemed right and sensible during the era of the Cold War that deterrence was the best way to prevent nuclear disaster. But the world is different now. Nuclear deterrence and even non-proliferation are insufficient safeguards. They are morally deficient as they preserve the ability of some to destroy creation by accident or by design. 7, the egregious humanitarian consequences that inevitably result from any use of nuclear weapons amount to a basic offense against humanity and the global good. The mitzvah of bal tashchit, the prohibition of wanton destruction, is an important Jewish principle. It is rooted in the requirement in the Torah that when one besieges a city, one must not cut down the fruit trees. The implication is clear. Even in the midst of war, we may not destroy the resources that will make life after war possible. Nuclear war is uncontrolled, wanton destruction, therefore prohibited. It threatens the very purpose of creation. As we have been taught by the prophet Isaiah, for thus said the Lord, the creator of heaven, who alone is God, who formed the earth and made it, who alone established it. He did not create it a waste, but formed it for habitation. 8, the reallocation of funding from arms to development is essential to social justice. Jews are in the midst of Passover, the festival of freedom and redemption. The ritual meal, the Seder, begins with our raising the unleavened bread, the matzah, and saying, Ha lachma anya. This is the bread of poverty which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are needy come and celebrate Passover. The Hebrew prophets remind us that society is judged by how it treats the weakest members of society. True religion requires action which translates ritual into transformative action. On Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year, a 27-hour fast, we read the words of Isaiah. Is such the fast I desire? A day for people to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast? A day when the Lord is favorable? No, this is the fast I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness, untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break every yoke, to share your bread with the hungry, to take the wretched poor into your home, and when you see the naked to clothe him, and not to ignore your own kin. Then shall your light burst forth like the dawn, and your healing spring up. 9, peace does not consist in mere absence of war, but rather in enjoyment of a full set of rights and goods that foster the complete development of the whole person and community. The Hebrew word for peace is shalom. It is derived from the Hebrew root shin lamed mem, meaning to be whole or complete. Shalom truly means a state of wholeness where every human being can live out their full human potential and safety with resources necessary to live healthy and productive lives. 10. In short, to achieve nuclear abolition, we need to resist succumbing to the limits set by political realism. The fear that drives the reluctance to disarm must be replaced by a spirit of solidarity that binds humanity to achieve the global common good of which peace is its fullest expression. I would like to repeat the words that I spoke the last time I had the opportunity to speak on this issue at the United Nations. As you all know, emblazoned on the wall of this great body are the words of the Hebrew prophet Isaiah. They represent the essence of the mission of this great body. And he shall judge between nations and reprove many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Lo yisagoy al goy cherev, v'lo yilmadu od milchama. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. The Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai bids us go further than Isaiah. He writes, "Don't stop after beating the swords into plowshares. Don't stop. Go on beating and make musical instruments out of them. Whoever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first." Our goal as religious leaders can be nothing less than the abolition of nuclear weapons as a moral necessity and the transformation of the resources which have been expended on nuclear weapons into a transformative peace dividend which will change the relationship among nations and lift the poor from the oppression of poverty. Kain Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will. May this be our will.
The Most Reverend Oscar Cantu has come to us from New Mexico, and he is the chair of the Committee on International Justice and Peace of the United States Conference of Bishops, which is undoubtedly one of the most influential organizations in the United States. It's an honor to have you here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful to, and excuse my voice, I've been, I had a generous friend who was visiting and gave me the cold that she had. I'm grateful to the Holy See Mission and the Global Security Institute for sponsoring today's event, and to the United Religions Initiative, Religions for Peace, and the World Evangelical Alliance for their support. In particular, I want to thank our host, Archbishop Auza, for his gracious invitation. My modest contribution to our discussion today will be anchored in the Catholic tradition and in the statements of the Holy See and the U.S. bishops. Catholic teaching on nuclear weapons is rooted in the respect for the life and dignity of the human person, based on the belief that persons are created in the divine image. Catholics hold that every human life has value and every human being is worthy of respect. For this reason, we take seriously the command, "Thou shalt not kill." The Church's teaching tradition attempts to reconcile the need to avoid killing and the requirement to defend others. This tradition is found in the just war teaching. Within the Church's living tradition, the application of this teaching continues to undergo development under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit as our world faces new moral questions. And few moral questions are more urgent than those posed by the awesome and unprecedented power of nuclear weapons. Three principles of the just war tradition are especially applicable to nuclear weapons: discrimination, proportionality, and probability of success. Discrimination. For an act of war to be just, it must discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. One cannot intend to slaughter innocent civilians. The moral problem with nuclear weapons is that the incredible devastation that they wreak cannot discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. And if history is any guide, there is a real risk that the use of nuclear weapons by two adversaries is likely to escalate. Proportionality. The death and destruction caused by the use of force cannot be out of proportion to the goal of protecting human life and human rights. The raw destructive capacity and lingering radiation of nuclear weapons make their use morally unthinkable. Probability of success. The use of force must have serious prospects of success for it to be justified. What would success look like in a nuclear war? It's impossible to imagine. As Pope Benedict admonished us, in nuclear war, there would be no victors, only victims. More than half a century ago, in 1963, St. John the 23rd called for a global and verifiable ban on nuclear weapons. In 1965, the Second Vatican Council declared the following: "The horror and perversity of war is immensely magnified by the addition of scientific weapons. For acts of war involving these weapons cannot inflict massive and indiscriminate destruction, thus going far beyond the bounds of legitimate defense. All these considerations compel us to undertake an evaluation of war with an entirely new attitude." Gaudium et Spes, number 80. The Council also articulated profound concern about deterrence and the arms race. The Council argued that it is not a safe way to preserve a steady peace, nor is the so-called balance resulting from this race a sure and authentic peace. At the 2005 Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, the Holy See stated that when the Church expressed its limited acceptance of nuclear deterrence during the Cold War, it was with clearly stated condition that deterrence was only a step on the way towards progressive nuclear disarmament. The Holy See has never countenanced nuclear deterrence as a permanent measure. At a UN General Assembly meeting on nuclear disarmament in 2013, the Holy See said the following: "The chief obstacle to the elimination of nuclear arms is continued adherence to the doctrine of nuclear deterrence. With the end of the Cold War, the time for acceptance of this doctrine is long past. The Holy See does not countenance the continuation of nuclear deterrence, since it is evident that it is driving the development of ever new nuclear arms, thus preventing genuine nuclear disarmament." Building on this moral skepticism of deterrence, at the 2014 Vienna gathering, Pope Francis affirmed the following: "Nuclear deterrence and the threat of mutually assured destruction cannot be the basis for an ethic of fraternity and peaceful coexistence among peoples and states. The youth of today and tomorrow deserve far more. They deserve a peaceful world order based on the unity of the human family, grounded on respect, cooperation, solidarity, and compassion." Pope Francis was echoing the teaching of the Second Vatican Council that deterrence only brings a peace of a sort and not authentic peace. Real peace is built on encounter, dialogue, trust, and relationships, not on a balance of terror. As the Second Vatican Council taught, the arms race is an utterly treacherous trap for humanity, and one which ensnares the poor to an intolerable degree. Rather than being eliminated thereby, the causes of war are in danger of being gradually aggravated. While extravagant sums are being spent for the furnishing of ever new weapons, an adequate remedy cannot be provided for the multiple miseries afflicting the whole modern world. The Holy See, in its United Nations contribution on nuclear disarmament, Time for Abolition, notes that with the end of the Cold War and the emergence of a multipolar world, nuclear deterrence works less as a stabilizing force and more as an incentive for countries to break out of the non-proliferation regime. The peace of a sort promised by nuclear deterrence has led to enormous amounts of money being allocated for modernization of nuclear weapons to the detriment of human development and addressing the underlying causes of war. As Pope Francis taught in Evangelii Gaudium, inequality eventually engenders violence, which recourse to arms cannot and never will be able to resolve. Perhaps most significantly, the Holy See employed newer moral arguments related to the problem of intention and to unnecessary suffering. For deterrence to be credible, one has to intend mass destruction with intensive and lasting collateral damage, inhumane suffering, and the risk of escalation, and be involved in a whole set of acts that are predisposed to use. The conclusion, the system of nuclear deterrence could no longer be deemed a policy that stands firmly on moral ground. One cannot intend and prepare for doing what is morally reprehensible. The Holy See also noted that scientists and international lawyers are now giving more attention to the unnecessary suffering inflicted by the use of nuclear weapons. Pope Francis, in his Vienna message, greeted the hibakusha, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and called for more attention to unnecessary suffering. As St. John Paul II said in Hiroshima in 1981, to remember Hiroshima is to abhor nuclear war. To remember Hiroshima is to commit oneself to peace. The bishops of the United States took up the call of the Second Vatican Council to evaluate war with a new attitude in 1983 in the landmark pastoral letter, The Challenge of Peace. Echoing the teaching of St. John Paul II, they argued, deterrence is not an adequate strategy as a long-term basis for peace. 10 years later, in the 1993 pastoral, The Harvest of Justice is Sown in Peace, the U.S. bishops maintained the eventual elimination of nuclear weapons is more than a moral ideal. It should be a policy goal. In a 2010 letter to President Obama, Cardinal Francis George, then president of the Bishops' Conference, wrote the following: "We are pastors and teachers, not technical experts. We cannot map out the precise route to the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons, but we can offer moral direction and encouragement. The horribly destructive capacity of nuclear arms makes them disproportionate and indiscriminate weapons that endanger human life and dignity like no other armaments. Their use as a weapon of war is rejected in church teaching based on just war norms. Although we cannot anticipate every step on the path humanity must walk, we can point with moral clarity to a destination that moves beyond deterrence to a world free of the nuclear threat. To achieve this goal, we must, in the words of Pope Francis, acknowledge that now is the time to counter the logic of fear with the ethic of responsibility, and so foster a climate of trust and sincere dialogue." Thank you.
I would urge everyone to carefully read the statement of the Holy See, nuclear disarmament, the time for abolition. And if anybody is so moved, and I would hope everybody would be so moved, to share it with your congregations. I see many people here with religious congregations. And of course, there are missions here, but it's your job to read the statement of the Holy See. But if anybody would like to, is so moved, as I have been so moved, to write a letter to His Holiness Pope Francis. You can send it to the Global Security Institute, and we will ensure that they are delivered appropriately. It's really important that there be thoughtful feedback from thoughtful people, and I can see in this audience a lot of highly influential people and people who know highly influential people. And as Tyler Stevenson pointed out, we are in a conflict over this issue. There are people who disagree with us, who believe that the best way of ensuring the peace is by maintaining the threat of use of nuclear weapons. And they're not doing this because they want to cause turmoil in the world. They're doing it because they have the sincere belief that this is the best way to obtain peace and security. And they're wrong. And we need to win the battle. Every 5 years, an amazing, in 1893, there was a gathering called the Parliament of the World's Religions. And there was a gathering of religious leaders from all over the world. They just were meeting each other for the first time, many of them. One of the most powerful statements I understand that was made by a Swami from India, Swami Vivekananda. And all he said that was so powerful was, my brothers and sisters. My sisters and brothers. And that just so surprised people, that intimacy in a public gathering. And then they had to wait a whole 100 years before they could do it again. Well, one of the reasons was it was kind of hard to do because there were these things called wars. And you had World War I, and then World War II, and then the Cold War, and the Cold War ended. And so in 1993 was the centennial of the Council of a Parliament of the World Religions. And every 5 years since then, there has been an amazing gathering with I was at one in Chicago, there were 10,000 people from all over the world, and riding in the elevators was an amazing experience. And so this year there will be another gathering. I think it's in Salt Lake City, Utah. Yeah, they've had gatherings in Cape Town, South Africa, in Australia, and in Barcelona, Spain. And every 5 years they gather this extraordinary gathering of people of all the different faith traditions of the world. And I'm very pleased to introduce the current chair of the Parliament of the World's Religions, Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Sir.
Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, ladhi kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad al-Mustafa. I thought Jonathan is about to say that if you are so moved, here's the personal email address of Pope Francis and send an email to him. Utterly disappointed not to get that. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I was asked to speak on the from Islamic perspective, although I chair the Parliament's board. But the hat of Imam is always in my pocket because I'm called upon to be in that role. And this is only a second opportunity to speak from Islamic perspective. The first opportunity came actually exactly 41 years ago in May when India had its first nuclear test, and it was called, a code name was Smiling Buddha. Probably it never occurred to Buddha to copyright his name. And I was a student at Karachi University, and our Prime Minister, late Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, may God forgive his shortcomings and bless his soul, he said, even if we have to eat grass, we'll make our own bomb. Same philosophy of deterrence. Well, I was one of those crazy Pakistanis who refused to eat grass. No pun intended. And I said, this is utterly un-Islamic. And you simply cannot do it for no matter what reasons. That was the first opportunity, and I'm very thankful to the Archbishop, especially Jonathan, for giving me this opportunity to speak from Islamic perspective on that particular point. I also remember when I spoke on that topic, and I said it is going neighborhood to neighborhood. China did it, so India was saying that, well, if we don't do it, and Pakistan, and I remember saying that it might be the next neighbor, Iran. The Islamic law of warfare is very clear that one cannot kill non-combatant, period. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a leader of a peace movement of that time. For 13 years, he kept moving from place to place and his people to find peace. Finally, when he was able to establish peace sanctuary, there were attacks. And that's when God asked, stand up and defend your peace sanctuary. And the words of that permission are very particular. And in chapter 2 of the Quran, fight in the cause of God those who fight you, but do not transgress limits, for God does not love transgressors. Those limits were extraordinary, and one basic limit was you cannot hurt a non-combatant or food and crops in the gardens. And the way he practiced was in a very principled manner. One of his fellow companion, Khalid, God be pleased with him, he ended up killing some non-combatant and some dogs as well. When Prophet found out, peace be upon him, he stood up, faced Kaaba, and said, God, I have nothing to do with this. God, I have nothing to do with this. God, I have nothing to do with this. And it was his practice to emphasize by saying 3 times if it's extraordinarily important for him. And then according to that particular tribe's tradition, not only he gave compensation for those individuals, but also compensated for those dogs who were killed. That principle has been always a principle in the Islamic law. It has never been challenged. It has been built upon it. There is a whole field of Islamic law called Ilm-Sir, and it's in the international law of Islam. And that is not a bilateral and trilateral or a mutual understanding. It's a moral code which they must abide by. So if we take that much, these limitations cannot be achieved not to kill prisoners, non-combatant, women, children, clergy, not destroying crops, gardens and trees and wells and the rivers and the environment. That cannot be achieved, can it be, through nuclear bomb or these type of things? That's why, as a young person, without any degree in Islam at that time, since then I acquired 4 for somebody who needs to see them, it's utterly not only not kosher, my dear Rabbi from Chicago, but also non-halal. you simply cannot do it. Now, of course, speaking on this in this time when nation state, well, it brought a lot of fruit to humanity and civilization. That nation state has also massive responsibility of killing so many of human beings and coming up with amazing way of killing with the smallest of the effort a whole part of humanity. That's all, my brothers and sisters in humanity. We all need to individually and collectively seek forgiveness from God Almighty of what we have done in the name of nation states and its technology. But the challenge is that at this moment we have quite a bit of awareness, actually millions of dollars and billions of dollars of science, that how do we save humanity from the slow poison of the climate change. My friend from the evangelicals, the small church, right? There is some confusion about the science of it. You know what side I am on that. But there's no confusion about the science of the destruction of nuclear bombs. Is there? Science agrees what it can achieve. That one is a sure, slow poison. This is a sure, instant destruction of all the humanity. That's where my question is, Jonathan, when you're going to lead us to create a movement around, not around NPT and all that, as Bishop Swing was talking, but ABT, Abolition Now movement. That's what I'm looking for. And at the Parliament of the World's Religions, on October 15th to 19th, with Dalai Lama and many other Nobel laureates are going to be present, with 10,000 people from 80 nations and 50 people of 50 different religions coming together. I invite you to conceive a movement, because we already have a track against war, violence, and hate speech. We consider all three to be connected phenomena. Visiting a concentration camp close to Berlin, I kept asking myself, how human beings allowed that to happen? How did they? And I did not get an answer until I reached a Holocaust museum. That's where I learned the hate speech dehumanizes people to the level then anything is possible. And that dehumanization is speaking at the people where whole United Nations came into being to avoid all of those things. We must consider dehumanization, violence, and war can be slow, it could be instant. And that is the concern for which I request all of us to wonder, to pray, and instead of NPT, look for ANT, I would say, Abolition Now movement, yes, and treaty of that nature. Thank you so much. I look forward to being part of that movement. And one change we have in mind at the Parliament, not only this 10,000 network of interfaith movement around the world gather, but at the end of each major plenary, we invite those people to make a commitment. And I hope you will join me to make a commitment of eliminating something whose science is not confused, except our resolves are not there. Thank you.
Imam, yes. If you will give us the floor, or give us the forum, I will gladly take that opportunity to commence an Abolition Now movement at the Parliament of the World Religions.
Are you again?
And the reason why is not just the great quote that I hope the press that's here uses, that nuclear weapons are neither halal nor kosher, but because the terrible power to destroy ourselves and the readiness to unleash it is the backbone of daily nuclear deterrence. Strategic stability rests on mutual preparedness to do so. Today, it actually means multiple states are prepared, signaling the willingness to annihilate humanity and toss creation back to the wasteland of the early stages of Genesis. Some say that with proper management, the inherent dangers of nuclear weapons can be controlled, and the posture of threatening to use these devices is normal, safe, sane, rational, reasonable, and acceptable. The situation, however, is in fact abnormal, immeasurably dangerous, and morally unacceptable. It is certainly not reasonable to expect to rely in perpetuity on the infallibility of humans and machines, because we are very fallible creatures. If William Wilberforce, the great British abolitionist, had only called for better management of slavery, that horrible institution would still be shadowing us today. The possession and threat to use nuclear weapons in the pursuit of security represents unprecedented folly of the highest order and an expression of the law of power in its most raw and primitive form. As Senator Alan Cranston used to say, the weapons are unworthy of civilization, which must rest on morality and the power of law. That is why we so strongly support Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's call for a nuclear weapons convention or framework of agreements which will establish the verifiable, legally enforceable, universal elimination of nuclear weapons. Cutting off the production of fissile material, strengthening safeguards, verification measures, stopping nuclear testing, all these important incremental steps and so many other threat-reducing steps are part of the process. But the end point must be established clearly now. The political will to move forward on the incremental steps, which are just stalled, can be galvanized only once negotiations on elimination commence. However long it takes to complete, it's time to start the negotiation process now. But for people of faith, this love of the ultimate power is a distortion of our humanity and a fissure of human solidarity. This insight is so clearly expressed in the Holy See statement, Nuclear Disarmament, a Time for Abolition. This is one of the many reasons we are inspired by Pope Francis's leadership. His call, and I quote, "Now is the time to affirm not only the immorality of the use of nuclear weapons, but the immorality of their possession, thereby clearing the road to nuclear abolition." This message must be shared in every church, mosque, synagogue, these hallowed halls of the UN, and every parliament and Congress everywhere. It is that important. We are called, however, to doing far better than simply getting along. We are called to learn to love one another and become fully human. Let that calling be the magnet that moves the moral compass for the abolition of nuclear weapons. We can and will help move the world's nations from the very hazardous love of this ultimate power to the life-giving power of ultimate love. Michael, would you bring us home? May love guide us. May courage fill our hearts. May faith give us certitude in all that is good and all that is holy. May the humility to rely on the power of love and compassion inform us. May the wisdom to be effective be clear to us. May the intelligence to apply that wisdom be gifted to us. And may we be the peace within ourselves that we want to see in the eyes of our children, in the eyes of our friends, and to live in a world that doesn't risk ending the world. Let us be the hands that reach out and bring the world together in the way the great Creator who has gifted us this short moment together has told us in so many ways that it is intended. In the name of all that is good, all that is holy, all that is sacred, may that love fill us and guide us as we be the change that we want to see. Amen.
Amen. As it was said in the 1893 First Parliament of Religions, Sisters and Brothers, let us continue to work towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Thank you for your presence and good evening.